I lost myself in my marriage. And you told me in episode 1 that myself is hidden. So how do I find myself? Do I go and kick out all my protectors that have been with me my whole life? No, you don't want to do that. Relax. In part 1 of this video, I'm going to tell you exactly why you can't do that and don't want to. Well then, how do I find myself? I'll share that with you in part 2. You'll see it's not that hard. From Dr. Deb, that's me. Hey, I'm Dr. Deb. Welcome to episode 2 of We Have the Secret to Healing Crappy Marriages. Okay, so we ended our last episode being kind of stuck with a bunch of protectors, and the question is, why can't we just get rid of them? And there are 2 answers to that. The first is the neuroscience way. I think that's really cool. And then we're going to go into the more metaphorical way. Hey, if you want to skip the brain stuff, no problem. Go to the 4-minute mark. See you there. Our brains are more amazing than we can even wrap our minds around. Get this. We have 80 billion, not million, billion neurons in our brains. The part where 2 neurons meet is called the synapse. Why is that important? You see, there's 2 neurons there. There's a synapse where they meet, and on the end of each neuron are several places where there are synapses to meet other neurons. Get this. There are 125 trillion synapses in the brain. And through these synapses, each neuron can connect to another 5,000 to 10,000 neurons. Why is that important? When we're talking about our protectors, what are our protectors really? They're neuronal pathways in the brain. That is the reason why we can't just get rid of them. And the most really troubling, difficult part about our habits and attitudes and reactions that we wish we didn't have is that most of it's unconscious. Only 5% of our brain's activity is conscious. Not only that, not only is it out of our awareness, but every time a signal travels down a neural pathway, it reinforces that pathway. What do I mean? It's going to repeat that reaction more likely in the future. So, if your little parts as a child learned to cope the way I've described in these examples, it must have been repeated over and over. And that's why these moods and behaviors and attitudes and reactions stay with you. We can't see the reaction coming because it's not conscious. And then they fire, get this, in half a second. Okay, so why do we need all this brain stuff anyway? What's the difference? It's to show you one thing. The stuff, the information, the feelings, emotions, everything in our brain is so deeply connected in there, you can't even think of taking it out. It's impossible. What we don't want to do is take it out. What we do want to do is change it. And as we go forward, you're going to see exactly how. Okay, now I'm going to explain the whole thing all over again in terms of a little more metaphorical approach. Supposing you imagine that these attitudes, reactions, emotions, behaviors, supposing you thought of each one of them as having its own little personality. We already introduced you to Alice and Warren, her brother, and Robert. Alice had this kind of a part with a sarcastic personality. And Warren had a part that was kind of a numbing out personality. Robert had a part that was tough. You know, you're not going to hurt me. Even if you do, I won't feel it because I don't want you to win, right? So these were 3 different parts of three different people. We all actually have many parts, not just one per person. And each part, and here's a key thing, springs up when we're kids and we're vulnerable and we don't have any way to protect ourselves from fear, terror, shame, humiliation. And so the parts come into our lives that way. And they're there and they keep on being there for us for decades. And our self maybe never shows because these parts are always there. So you see, the parts would be unwilling to give up their jobs. And a very important piece of this is that these parts don't really trust that we have a self that can actually take care of everything. I mean, after all, how would the parts know that when they've been doing all the work? And how would your self know it exists, that you have a self, when the parts have been doing all the work? See? So here's where we start to take down the self from the attic and dust off all the cobwebs. Stay with me because now we're going to plunge into part 2 of this video, which is how to uncover the self. There are many ways to do that, and I came up with 5 of them. Way number 1, witnessing. When you talk about yourself, you're actually witnessing some scenario in your life, something that happened to you, some story you want to tell, but that about piece of it gives you a separation from the experience. You're not in it. You're not reliving it. You're not there. You're just witnessing it. So let me give you an example. Can you think of a time that you were so angry? You were so mad about something, you were just popping out of your skin. It was almost irrational. So let's talk about Renee. Renee thought a guest who had slept over her house when she wasn't there and she let a neighbor use her house, she thought that guest had stolen something because it was missing. She was sputtering with anger over the thought that she would have been taken advantage of like that, and she even started mentioning it, kind of a little gossip, to her friends. It was not a nice scene. Now, she did finally confront the guest, and the guest denied it, and the guest was very, very offended, by the way. Well, 3 days later, Renee was looking for something else, and she found both. Oh, man. Now, in that moment of being embarrassed, what happened? She could clearly see herself, the herself that had been overtaken with anger previously. She could see herself as this angry person, but it wasn't her anymore. At that moment, she was like, where the heck was my brain? I don't know. That's witnessing herself. That's taking a step back from the emotions that had overtaken her. And they stayed with her for 3 days, by the way. It was only when she found the missing item that she realized that she had been completely hijacked by this emotion of anger. Now, here's a very interesting part of this whole thing. Before she got to finding the thing that was missing, if some other person had said to her, hey, Renee, aren't you a little bit too angry? Aren't you a little irrational? She would have calmly and rationally said, no, I'm not. No, this is realistic. I have a good reason to be angry at this person. You see? Calm, yet still hijacked by this emotion of anger. So what needs to happen is to get into a witnessing state. And you cannot do that from a place of being angry. You would have to actually physically see your anger move away and confront it and look at it and go, that's not who I am. That is what I mean by way number 1, witnessing yourself. Notice, no one can point this out to you, because if you're still angry, you're going to stay angry. Pointing it out may make you more angry. The only person who can remind you that you got carried away with the anger and taken over by it is yourself. And the moment you see that, just seeing it, put you into that witnessing state. Okay, station break time. Please subscribe and comment. Even negative comments are great. It tells the algorithm that you're listening. And you can hit that little bell as well. And you can also put the like up, anything to let other people know that this is valuable. And I appreciate it. Way number 2. Focus on gratitude. You might think, what does gratitude have to do with all this? It does. Let's talk about Sam. Sam just lost a very big account for his company. It wasn't his fault. It happens. Things happen. But Sam was very, very upset. He was upset with himself. He was picking apart all the stuff he did wrong. And he didn't like being miserable. He wanted to be in self-energy. So he said to himself, let me try Dr. Deb's methods. I'm going to focus on gratitude. He took a break from work and went outside because the weather was stunning. And as he started to walk, some guy came past him in a wheelchair, being wheeled by an aide. And he thought to himself, what the heck am I complaining about? I've got my legs. And that was the start of a journey. Sam realized as he was walking that he could literally name 50 things he was incredibly grateful for his health, his brain working, his eyesight. He named every single part of his body because it meant a lot to him. He was in great shape. He'd been exercising. He was mostly happy. He had hobbies. He had his music that he loved, and so forth. The gratitude gave him perspective to see his tiny incident that he had at work in the context of everything else in his life. And that put him back in self-energy. Sam kept walking, breathing air, being glad to be alive, his mind kind of blank. And suddenly the Schuster account, that was a different account, popped into his mind. And he realized something that he had been meaning to take care of, but he was so overwhelmed previously with the failure that he forgot there was a very important point to make to those people so as to increase their participation in the work that he was doing with them. He took out his phone, made a note, and walked on. He did a little bit of a sigh. He realized even within the world of business, his work, he was in better shape than he was thinking just 20 minutes ago. Gratitude helped. Feeling that better feeling, he thought of his kids and how much he loved them. And that totally lifted his spirits. Number 3, how to feel in self. Get busy doing something that you love, something that brings you satisfaction, whether it's baking a cake or going out on your rollerblades and shooting down the block, or painting or music or your work because you love your work. When you do what you love, it perks up other parts of your brain that feel good about you. Let's talk about Eleanor. Eleanor was almost always anxious because her husband Alex could come home in any kind of a mood. She would never know what that mood was or was going to be, and she didn't know what to do. She didn't feel in self-energy because anxiety is not self-energy. So she went to her computer and she opened up a file that was very precious to her. It was the play she was writing. This play meant the world to her because it was an expression of her own self, her history. Because there's a part of her that's pretty proud of having survived, just that alone. She dug into it and worked. 3 hours later, she kind of looked up from her computer, totally shocked at how much time had gone by. But she felt good. And then the anxiety returned because she wondered if what she had written was good. She scrolled to the top of the page and started reading, and her heart almost stood still. She was breathless as she read what she wrote as if someone else had done this magnificent job. She couldn't believe how good it was. When Eleanor got to the end, she felt a rush of excitement. She knew what she'd done was good, and she knew that she was good. that gave her also a feeling of self. Self has strength. Self can handle life, not from a place of anger or toughness like Robert in the example. Self just has capability. Number 4 is self-compassion. And this is one that's really hard for people because they can love everyone else in the world except themselves. So I'm going to take an example of Irene. Irene hated herself. Irene had lots of friends because she was the kindest person on earth to everyone else. And so I'm going to take a technique from Jules Taylor Shore. So imagine Irene comes to me as her therapist, and I have Irene look upon a scenario that one of her friends is in that's just like hers. And I ask her, feel compassion for your friend. And of course, that's not hard for Irene. She loves her friend. And I said, see if you can imagine a cloud of vapor that surrounds your friend. And it's all compassion, sparkles and rainbows and unicorns of compassion that you have for your friend. And now, Irene, I want you to transfer that cloud to yourself. Allow it to settle around you. Feel how good it feels. Can you do that? Irene basked in that imagery and feeling of being surrounded by a beautiful, sparkling cloud of self-compassion. And just for a moment, she got away from the self-hate that she always feels. The reality is that you would have to repeat that exercise numerous times for it to really settle in, because you've spent years and years hating yourself if you have. And you need to have the experience of firing different neurons, but with practice, it works. And with help, for me, it for sure works. Number 5 of getting into your self-energy. Get every single one of your protectors. Tell each one why you love them, and then ask them to take a seat in the peanut gallery. Imagine couches for every one of your protectors, and you are left alone without them. Just you. Yourself. Now, anytime you think you're really feeling self-energy, but there's a part of you that's feeling anxious or angry or judgmental or critical or blaming or any of those things, it's another part. Just ask it to sit in the audience. So when everyone is sitting in the audience, ask yourself, what do I feel? What do I feel toward my parts? If you feel calm, if you feel curious about them, if you feel confident that you can handle life, you're in self. That's self-energy. So now that we've come to the end of part 2, I want to get you started on the next series of videos. What are these components of self-energy?